Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Nick and I discuss channeling frustrations into positive outcomes. We talked to Sierra Taliaferro about birding, environmental justice, and Harry Potter. It's a super great interview. She's really inspiring, so please check it out. And finally, hot water freezes faster than cold water. Maybe. Physicists can't seem to figure out if that statement is true or false. It's called the Mbappe effect after an experiment conducted by a Tanzanian teenager. The phenomenon continues to provide controversy. Studies have shown that where you measure temperature is extremely important. Is that like where, physically or where? Yeah,
physically where you put the thermometer matters so much when you're actually trying to do the experiment. Yeah.
Okay. However, the phenomenon can happen under certain conditions. So how about that? Everyone go get out your thermometer and test that.
I think it's totally wild. It doesn't make any sense at all. But yeah. Yeah, here we are. Water's weird.
Hit that music.
The next NAEP webinar is on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and you can check it out on July 13th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. Registration is now open at www.naep.org. Today's episode is sponsored by Integrity Environmental. Integrity Environmental is the premier environmental permitting and consulting group in the Alaska and Arctic regions. They have been in business for over 10 years. Integrity performs high-quality tank inspections to American Petroleum Institute standards and are the go-to firm industrial operators turn to for help navigating complex regulatory compliance issues. Check them out at www.integrity-env.com. Let's get to our segment. I don't know. What about from Sierra's interview? Any interesting takeaways from that? Because it was a really good interview. I really enjoyed it. It's excellent. A lot of different good points that she made.
Well, I think just what we've been talking about, the whole point of something in my world that's out of my control, it's frustrating. And instead of stewing on it, being negative about it, playing the victim, she did something.
Yeah.
And that's what all of us need to be doing right now. Stop complaining, stop being trolls on LinkedIn and Instagram and wherever. Twitter. Oh God, Twitter. And then, let's not get into that. And take that energy and do something positive with it. Yeah, bad stuff is happening, but complaining about it just takes up space that you could be using to do something,
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, I'm struggling with that as, prior to us talking here, I am having a really hard time not being frustrated, I would even say I'm actually really having more of a hard time figuring out where to channel this energy. How can I put my frustrations to good use? And I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't think I've been this frustrated in a really long time. So yeah. It's confusing for me, So I don't know. How do we do that?
Well, I think we're doing it here with the show, right? This one thing is we're exposing people and we're having conversations about many different things. So we're talking about environmental justice. We've had Callie Valenturf on the show talking about her situation and being a woman in this field. And so I think, Nick, you need to own that we are doing something. You're not doing nothing, and then also keep it simple. Sierra's solution is she's not trying to fix everything. If your mind is like, how can I burst into the White House and make this happen? That's not gonna happen. But what can I do in my community or even just in my workplace, something smaller? And if everybody did one small thing in their own way, that'll make a big difference.
That is really positive. I like that. I do.
That's why we need more women in power positions, because you men, Nick, Nick, you're like the most understanding woman ally, whatever. Mm-hmm. Whatever. Yes, but you're still your knee-jerk reaction is I want to punch somebody. I know.
It's still very emotional. I can't help it. I can't help it. Right. And I realize that
is your reaction. Imagine other men that's not their go-to already is, violence or anger, rage. Not that there aren't women who are doing that, but we tend to hit less hard.
I at least recognize that it's there, right? I know my first reaction to a lot of stuff is emotional. And I have to remind myself, I'm oh, you're being emotional. You're letting your emotions drive how you feel right now. You need to kind of take a step back. Doesn't mean it works every time. Doesn't mean I can always keep it under wraps. But yeah, it's funny to think. Like I say, it's not all men, I'm sure, but like for me, emotion is right at the surface. It's like right there, right underneath. So knowing that, it helps. But yeah, there's still times.
But we want to also keep people from like crying in the shower.
Right.
There's like, I have rage and I need to let it out. But then there's also like, I have rage and I can't let it out. And, so anybody listening, we're here to help if you need to talk.
Yeah. I mean, genuinely.
Depending on how you're feeling, we'll send you to Nick or me. Or maybe Kara. Kara has a great outlook on everything. Yeah.
Well, I will say, like, I love being there for people. It's actually one of my favorite things. Like, when people are upset and frustrated, that actually helps me kind of talk through things, because I get it. I understand where people are coming from and I want to be supportive. I think that's one of the best parts of the show is how supportive we have been to people that are listening, the people that come on. It's pretty nice. So you're all right. We are doing something. How about that? You got me. We're doing something. Yeah, I know. That's
Someone gave me some really good advice the one time when I was going through a really rough time letting go of something, an issue. They said you can visit, but you can't stay there.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was such great advice, and I use it with so many situations.
That makes sense. I like that.
And it's a good point. So what do we call it? Doom scrolling, right? I mean, it's easy to do, especially right now with the greenhouse gas emissions just coming out as well this past week. I mean, it's easy to doom scroll. But like you say, if you give it the space, acknowledge that it exists, because if you pretend it's not there, it's going to eat you up anyway. Acknowledge it exists, visit, but don't stay. That's a good way of putting it. It really is.
It is. I think it works for our segments too. Let's visit our segment, but let's not stay here. So let's get to our interviews.
Perfect. Hello and welcome back to EPR. And today we have Sierra Taliaferro on the show. Sierra is an environmental leader and social justice advocate. She's also the founder of the Green Obsidian, a social media outlet that produces content centered around the environmental conservation topics and issues with an emphasis on environmental justice and equity to raise awareness for diversity in the conservation field and to inspire the next generation of environmental leaders. Welcome, Sierra.
Thank you for having me.
So good to have you here. And, you have a lot of experience in land management and water conservation and a love of birds, we found.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Nothing too crazy,
Yeah, right. We'll get to that. So where did your environmental career start and how did you end up where you are now?
Oh man, that's such a loaded question.
Oh yeah.
I would have to say, like most people, it starts at childhood, and that's so cliche. But I think for me personally, it definitely did, where I literally stayed outside all the time in the backyard, where my mom would force me to come inside. And I think it propelled from there, but I always thought of like a conservation career or an environmental science career. It was never in my trajectory. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I did not like science at all.
Oh,
and absolutely. I was more of a theater kid. Like I loved forensics, theater, impromptu speaking, comedy sports. That was my jam. Okay. And then
wait, comedy sports?
Yeah. What is that?
Oh, it's hilarious. It's just it's impromptu theater essentially, where you have these skits, but it's just you're kind of making it up as you go along, and you can make it as comical as you like. But there's no framework for it. You have a topic, and you just kind of snowball from there, and it helps you stay on your toes. Definitely.
Oh yeah.
It's about creativity in the moment.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what I was into. So I was like, science, what? so it really wasn't until my senior year of high school, I ended up taking this class called IB Ecosystems and Society, because I was a full IB student. For those who don't know what full IB is, it's International Baccalaureate. It's kind of like AB classes, but on steroids, essentially. So I took this class my senior year, and it sounded interesting. Again, I love being outside. So I'm like, okay, let's try it. I had one, and it was the class that like you need to fill in aside from having like a study hall. And I'm like, I don't want to do study hall again. It's just sitting there doing nothing.
Right.
So I took this class, and I absolutely loved it. Like I can't describe how it made me feel, but it just felt good to learn about different topics, from soil like the composition of soil. We even raised chickens, pheasants, and ducks. We had this one class duck named Sexy Thing who gave us a heart attack because he ran out of the classroom when the bell rung. And if you've ever know anything about Rufus King High School back in Milwaukee, it is always crowded when the bell rings. So him literally run. I mean, you had this duck literally the size of your hand, runs out of the hallway, quacking the whole way. And so half the class is ducking and dodging, weaving, trying to find this duck. Anyway, hence why I love birds, right?
Yeah, right.
But I literally took this class and it completely changed my whole trajectory of my life. Where I was going to go into theater, I completely changed my whole track. So I ended up changing, rerouting what I wanted to do, looking at colleges even, which is how I ended up in Florida. I said, I think this is what I want to do. I want to study environmental science. I don't know what I want to do in environmental science, but I know I want to do it. And so I ended up going to the Thorne University. Shout out to the gang, go Wildcats. In Daytona Beach, Florida. It's a historical Black college. And I majored in environmental science, or integrated environmental science is what we call the major down there. And I was really that's really where I got involved with birds. That's really, because it's Florida, there's a lot of birds that we don't have in Milwaukee. And it just completely sparked my interest. And I really, from then on, I was hooked. And I've been here ever since.
We're absolutely glad to have you, though. So that's great. So let's dive into this a little bit, right? So birds, you said, you grew up in Wisconsin, you live in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area now. Yeah, there are a lot more birds in Florida.
Tell me about it.
Is that why you stayed? Is that what kind of prompted you to stay there? How deep is that bird love?
A little bit of the weather helps too, yeah. Especially during the wintertime. But this transition to Florida it was such a divine timing is what I go off of. And I was, much as I love Milwaukee, I was ready to expand. I was ready to grow. And after I graduated college, I'd always talked about, after college, I graduated and then went back to Milwaukee because I got a job naturally. You go where the money.
Yeah.
But in the back of my mind, I always I'm going to get back to Florida eventually. Didn't know when, didn't know where, but I know it was going to happen. So it was that manifestation over time. And I kid you not, I took a family vacation in 2019 and back in June 2019. And that's when I really started to contemplate, maybe this could be possible. Maybe I could actually do this, take a leap of faith and just see what happens. Just jump and the net will appear. And so that's what I did. So I went back home once I returned back home back in that June of 2019, I started to apply for jobs right away, right in the Fort Lauderdale area, because that's where we had our family vacation. And I ended up getting a job right away, wow. Maybe within a week. Yeah. And so between the end of June to August, September really is when I was really packing up my life to get ready. And by the time I ended up moving down there by November 4th. So it was really in this small chunk of time where I literally sold everything in my apartment, packed 2 bags, put them in my Nissan Versa, and hit the road and didn't look back. And from that moment forward was probably one of the most courageous things I've ever done in my lifetime, at least right now. It was probably one of the most courageous things I've ever done for myself. And I'm so glad I took the chance. And I'm so glad I said yes, because I don't know, who knows what would have happened if I didn't come. Anything, right? But it was the chance that I took to bring me to this point now, to even be able to talk to you all. Who knows if I would have stayed home, would the Green Obsidian even exist? So it's a lot of that divine timing that comes into play when we think about experiences and how they define us. Moving to Florida in the way that I did, with the support that I have, as hard as it was to leave Milwaukee. I love Milwaukee, I really do. But sometimes you want a change, and that change was timed perfectly.
Do you think, and this may be an unfair question to ask you, do you think your experience in theater, right, where or this experience with comedy where you're supposed to be impulsive and creative and in the flying, do you think that helped you kind of make that decision? I
think so, in some way. I also am so grateful for forensics in comedy sports and just in general, just impromptu speaking in general, because I was really So in forensics, especially, there's so many topics that you can go into the categories that you choose to perform in. And one of them was storytelling for me. And oddly enough, where am I now? Where again, with the Green Obsidian, I tell stories. And it's definitely been helpful to be able to use that creativity and put that into writing. And my English class, shout out to my high school English teachers.
There you go. I was great too. Honestly, I love that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier unfair questions, and we're going to have more. But do you have a favorite bird?
Depends on what species, what family we're talking about. That's a hard one. It really is. How dare you ask a favorite bird? But,
it's like when someone asks your favorite song or favorite band, you're like,
yeah, exactly. I know.
Exactly. I think for me, a bird that really calls to my spirit is the heron, just because how prehistoric looking they look. Whether that's a gray blue heron, a white egret, just that heron family, but the gray blue heron especially, I think, has just this presence about it where it stands, the way that it moves and maneuvers through the water. It just reflects patience and just this oneness, and also like this history with it. Like so for me, like I love herons. I love a lot of birds, but herons in particular, they tend to just represent so much more to me than just a bird. It's the representation of what that bird is and how they act. You ever see a heron out there, you just see it's always alone. It's taking its time, doesn't rush anything. That's what I pay attention to when I think about birds. It's their mannerisms. It's how they maneuver through the world, just like we do, just in a different space and realm and mindset.
Yeah. I wish I was that kind of bird. That would be great.
Me too.
I think they're amazing too, seeing them fly. It's like, how do they stay in the air? They're just so big.
They must save a whopping on airplane tickets, okay? I could fly.
Oh, that's funny. I love it.
It takes a lot of courage to, as you said, to do what you did and make that decision and make a big move around it as well. It's one thing to say, I'm going to change careers, but I'm going to stay home and not. But you uprooted your entire life to make that change for something that you found a passion in, which is really awesome because, it's hard to teach people, especially young people who are looking for like, what's my passion? They're searching, what's my passion? It's like, you can't really go out looking for it. You have to explore and wait. It will come, but you found it and then you made a change. So aside from just keeping an open mind and waiting for that spark to happen and then taking action on it, what other advice do you have for people finding their way in the environmental fields?
Always be open to learn. Always be open to expanding your mind because no one has the answers for everything. We're always in this continuous space of learning. And so always keep an open mind to absorb information. I think that would be the best advice that I can give, to always just be open to learn more because there's just so much. Environmental science is so broad, and that's the beauty of it. It's not confined in this box. There's so many ways that you can get involved in it. So always continue to want to feed that curiosity, because it helps to expand your mind and pass that along to others as well.
That's awesome.
That's a good answer.
We also talk a lot on the show about how the scientific community still struggles with inclusivity, and you're trying to change that. So tell us what the Green Obsidian is all about and how you use social media to get your message out.
Oh, man. Yeah. And I have to say, even the thought of the Green Obsidian and how it got started, it was really like, it came out of passion. Like it came out of fury because of it. Because it was like this, knowing that there wasn't a lot of diversity within the environmental science field, and knowing people wanted it, but weren't really doing a lot about it, was frustrating, so frustrating. And especially within the Black community, sometimes we feel like, oh, environmental science, that's a white people thing. It's not. It's everybody's thing. And so I was kind of in, besides the fury that I had with not having diversity in the environmental field, and then you also have that aspect of it, I'm like, how can I amplify that there's more of us out here? And so that's kind of that's how it began at my kitchen table. And it just so happened to be Black History Month. So it just kind of like a divine timing.
Right.
So yeah. I was like, you know what? I know there's people out there, but it's just a matter of finding them because they're not in the mainstream media like most other people who contribute to environmental conservation are. And so that's where my research aspect came into play. It wasn't the Green Obsidian then, but it was just like this platform that I had, this idea really to just highlight somebody every day for 28 days for Black History Month. On all Black people who are contributing in the world of environmental conservation and how broad it is, essentially. And so it started on Facebook, just on my personal page. And then it started to get buzz. That was the first year. And then the second year is when it really started to take off. And that's kind of where I started to transition it over to LinkedIn and to Facebook, because that's when I started to tag a lot of those individuals who I was highlighting. So for the last 3 years, that's what it was. It was LinkedIn and Facebook. And then this past year, and I said, I need to go bigger, go home, right? Go bigger, go home. And then that's how I birthed the Green Obsidian. Like, how can I use this platform that I've created as a landing page so that it's a point of reference for someone? Because my Facebook page is private. So, so when I link a lot of the LinkedIn posts to my Facebook page, a lot of people may not have Facebook. So I understand that. Also, my Facebook page is private. And so I wanted to find a public platform for someone to be able to go from that LinkedIn page to somewhere that you can use it as a point of reference. So that's how I created the Green Obsidian.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And it is definitely needed. And I've, scanned through them and looked through all the people that you have on there. And it's a great list of people. And they're all doing so many different things. Like you said, there's no one job for any one type of person. How do you go about finding the people that you do highlight? Because like you said, it's not like they're easy. They're not everywhere, So how are you digging them up?
Yeah, I keep my eyes out on the road, I'm always reading and I'm always listening. So when someone's name or someone's work kind of passes through, whether it's my screen or my computer screen, for example, I make sure I write their name and I hyperlink any of the work that they're tagged in. So it's a point of reference for me to go on later because I make a list. I'm already on list 2024, so I'm like middle through, but I just write their names down and I use it for later. So I keep myself on a deadline. And so I give myself a decent amount of people, put about 40 people on that list as a cap. So just as a fill-in case I can't find a lot of content on that person, I can save them for another list for later. Because you never know who people are connected to. That's the thing. Because even though they may not have a lot of content on the internet, that doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them and learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah.
And then that helps to put their work out there and connect that work to the rest of the world to show how they can support that work that they're doing. So I just keep a running list of people that cross my mind, or I see their content on either LinkedIn or Facebook or on the news, anywhere. I make sure I write it down and I save it because Google Drive is my life and it runs my world. And so I stay organized in that capacity to just write their names, hyperlink to the article that they're tagged in, and I save it for later. So come the deadline that I start actually writing these things is about like end of September, early October. The latest to get started is November because I keep myself a decent amount of time so I don't stress myself out or stretch myself thin. It gives me time to really write them because not only am I writing them, but I'm also reading and learning about them myself. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking the time to go through each and every one and reading them. And some of these stories are amazing. And I'm like, dang, I didn't know that. Yeah. Like, dang. So sometimes I read it twice, Right. So there's, there's a lot of that goes into it. And a lot of the writing, it's not like copy and paste. Like a lot of the writing that I put on there, it's my own personal style of writing. Okay. Shout out to my English teachers. They are the bomb.com. That helped me put into that practice of putting yourself into the writing that you have. Because as you read them, it's how I would talk. Essentially, it's not copy and paste. It takes time and it takes energy to write every single one and to take a bunch of content that they've been tagged in or referenced in and to compile it. Ooh, yes. Yeah. But the most important thing that I do is making sure that how people can get in contact with them or stay connected to them and how they can support them. That's the most important thing too.
Yeah. I love it. I think this is how I discovered you. I'm always looking for people for the podcast. So I'm always watching and I'm like, okay, who's doing this? And I'm looking for diverse groups of people. I'm like, oh, who's this? What's this? Who's Sierra? Somebody I know must have liked something you posted. And I'm like, ooh, tag her. What's this? Like,
and Laura's like, do you want to be friends? Yes, no, maybe.
Pretty much.
Heck yeah. That's how it starts. Right? It starts with one click.
Yeah. And I do know that you put a lot of work into them because I've scanned through them, like I said, and it is a lot of work and a lot of really great people that you feature on there. But as you mentioned, the reason you're doing it is because you didn't have these role models. When I started my career, I didn't have a lot of role models in the space that I was in at the time.
Yep.
Still, environmental is, mostly a man's world. It's changing. There's a lot more women still working on the Black and brown piece. But when you were growing up, like you said you didn't have the interest until you took the class. At that point, did you have any other mentors or people, who gave you the courage to say, I can go down this road?
Ooh.
Or was there anyone, or did you just have it internally? Because that happens.
I think it just happened internally. Because again, it's an unknown field that a lot of Black people don't go into.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like this unknown, like, what's your major? even my university, I kid you not, it was my university's environmental science program was very new when I started. Like we were all guinea pigs. We were guinea pigs of the program. And so through when I went to freshman orientation and they give you like a nice little swag bag and everything. And they ask you, so what's your major? And I tell you environmental science. And they're like, I didn't even know we had that. So it's building presence about what the major is and how people can get involved, that you don't necessarily have to be super scientific to get involved in conservation. That's the thing. I think that's the biggest misconception. And some of the people that I post about, some of them don't have degrees in environmental science. They just contributed they've found something that really jives with their energy and their spirit, whether it's beekeeping, whether it's anything,
Yeah.
And they did it.
Yeah.
They just did it.
Yeah. And it's a great point. And I think ties right into where we want to go next with the interview. Like, the current administration's placed a lot of emphasis on environmental justice. And we still don't really know what that looks like from them. We don't. But as a practitioner in this space, have you seen a shift on the conversation we're having about environmental justice?
I think so. I think there's still a lot of work. There's a lot of the conversation that still needs to be had. And a lot of that portion of it is very hard. Yeah. It's a very hard conversation to have. Because when we talk about environmental justice, we have to acknowledge the history that got us to that point and what caused it. Because if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear about the direction that they're trying to go, but it's very important to have those hard conversations first to acknowledge it. It's like the elephant in the room. If we don't acknowledge it, how are we going to get past it?
Yeah.
So those need to happen as well, as much as like any of the meetings or the congregations. It has to be community focused, that's for sure. But also this like systems thinking approach about how to tackle the problems with solutions, realistic solutions, not just solutions that sound good on paper that might get you a grant, right. But realistic solutions that work for real people. I think that is the biggest conversation we need to have in this modern day and age.
And to that point, I think historically, it's an area where we've seen data like GIS data, has actually highlighted the actual dramatic inconsistencies that we see in these communities, right? We've seen people complaining, we're dealing with cancer at higher rates than other people. And they're like, okay, well, yeah, whatever. And then you look at the actual contaminants in the soils and in the air pollution that you have in areas. And it's like, oh, this is an actual thing. This is really what's happening.
Yeah.
So we have the data, and the data's only gotten better. But I still feel like, are we seeing the environmental outcomes we want for disadvantaged communities? What's the answer to that question?
And most importantly, do those communities even know?
Yes.
How are you informing them? So that's the other aspect of the work that I do is citizen science. I love citizen science. We don't do enough of it, honestly. The benefit of having citizen science is that you have community being intertwined with scientific research to be able to find those pockets. Where are those levels happening? What high levels of lead are happening? When you have water quality testers who are like high school students, or just like bird nest monitoring, which is what I do, which is what I do, bird nest monitoring, to check for PCB levels. But it also gives community a chance to get involved, to get the hands-on experiences, to see it without necessarily going into debt for it to go to college. Or, it's the exposure. That's what I used to tell my students. It's the exposure. Whether you do this work or not, that's okay. But it's the exposure that lives with you and gives you an elevation of knowledge. This exposure helped you to kind of maneuver around certain topics. Like, you know what, I kind of know about that. It keeps you intrigued and engaged in some capacity. And that will depend on each person, like how engaged they are. But that exposure is probably the most important thing. Without the exposure, none of us would know. None of us would know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. Like, we talked about, lead contamination, right? When you have a community that didn't know they were being contaminated with lead for 40 years or longer, whatever it is. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, we knew that so long ago. Nobody told you? And you're like, that experience, that exposure there is another example of, okay, I, as a citizen, can be mindful of the things this is what I can do to make sure that doesn't happen to my community. Mm-hmm. You don't even know it's an issue until you hear that story. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Mm-hmm. So what more do you think we should be doing to get the environmental justice initiative to have that stronger, better viability?
I think bring leaders from our community to those talking tables, to those tables is important, because we know that they're having the conversations, but it's more important to know who's at that table and who those people are connected to on the ground level, and how they can take those conversations and kind of digest it, to take that information and digest it so that it's in, because I love to reference food. It's all about food, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can. I can't eat a whole pie at once. I would love to try. But, but when it comes to whether it's pie or lasagna, I can't eat that whole thing at once. That's a lot of lasagna. That's a lot of carbs, a lot of cheese, But what I do is I make sure that I dissect it into chunks, leftovers. Yeah. That's the most important thing. When you talk about big information, like the common person in the community may not know a lot about what TMDLs are, right? Right. So that can be very intimidating for them. That's one piece of that whole lasagna is TMDLs, right? Right. But if you cut it into pieces so that they're digestible pieces for them to be easily break down, to have more realistic perspective, like, I never thought about it that way. That's how you connect to people and those bigger concepts and breaking them down into smaller chunks, not dumbing it down by any means, but just still stays informative while getting the main sources of information, but using common language and common perspective so that it digests easy within their system. They probably will take some home leftovers, right? They'll take those leftovers, be like, that was pretty good. I'm gonna take some home and pass it to somebody else.
Right. And the best part, it's time, right? You don't eat leftovers all at once. You can't. That's not what it is. That means tomorrow, the next day, a month from now. Hopefully not a month from now. That's a bad lasagna.
Unless you freeze it.
Unless you freeze it. That's right.
You freeze it.
That's right. But
yeah. I knew Sierra and I would be friends. Like, we're going to eat some lasagna and some pie next time I'm in Miami and talk about TMDLs. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Come during mango season. That'll be our dessert.
There you go. Oh, that's so awesome. Well, that's it. Like I say, we love to have fun on the show. We really do. And, it's kind of what we talk about. We have a field notes segment where we hear about stories of people in the field and the funny and scary things that happen. So you are a birder, right? You've done some bird banding. And is it, you have a really great story about an incident in one of the state parks there?
Oh man. Yeah. When I was an undergrad, my research project was based on birds, but it was the gray catbird and how resilient they are to prescribed burn areas in the Tomoka State Park. Oh, cool. So I was bird banding essentially. So catching birds in a net and putting a ring on them. That's the best way to describe it to people. Again, dissecting it. So we set up these nets along the trail so that the birds fly into the nets and catch them in a safe way, of course. And in the park, I'd get up as early as 3:30, 4 o'clock so I could be out there, put up the nets, because birds are early. So you need to get there early. So we'd get there about 3:30, 4, and start setting up our nets, be up by 6. And it's still dark, by the way. It's still dark. So you don't know what's out there. And I mean, we would run into all types of things, bobcats, deer. Oh, deer are the worst to get out of bird nest. Oh my God. They're the worst. They're the worst. But one in particular was I was going down the trail and I saw a eastern diamondback rattlesnake eating a bird. Well, they weren't eating a bird out of the net, but he was across the trail that we had to cross. And I would say he was at least 7 feet. He was long.
Oh my gosh.
He was long. I'm sorry, Mom, because she's never heard the story. Because when she hears about all of my adventures that I've had in Florida when I was an undergrad, I mean, I've gone through a lot of wildlife adventures, from being chased by wild boars to just things that would give a mom a heart attack, you know? Yes. And so this rattlesnake, I'm super intrigued, but I'm also like scared as heck because nothing could do some damage to me. And so the person that I was with, he was absolutely not terrified of snakes. Like, he grew up in Florida, like this was his jam. He's like, oh, that's just a diamondback. That's cool. Run that back for me, Claire. And I'm like, I really want to take a picture of it, but I'm just so petrified to like step over it. Like, the body of the snake was so long, like one half of its body was still on the left-hand side. And then the head was like wrapped in a coil on the right side with the tail rattling. It was a long snake. It was a long snake. So I was like, can you just hold my hand? And I had my camera in my hand. And I say, click, okay, we can go. It's the best picture I ever had. One of the best pictures I ever took. Petrifying.
That's awesome. I can only imagine what your Wisconsin mom is thinking about with Florida adventures and alligators and everything else.
I'm telling you, there was this one time I got attacked by fire ants. I didn't even know. I didn't even know.
Ants in Florida are terrible.
Oh, they're terrible. God, and we don't have those in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't even paying attention, but I was paying attention to something else. I was at a football game. That's how they get me. I was at a football game for my school. And I just remember I had on sandals. I just kept I was looking at the band, but I can't remember dang, my foot itches so bad. And I looked down. I stepped in a whole hive of fire ants. Covered my foot completely.
Yeah.
And of course, you just brush them off. You go about the day. And then the next day I go out for a field to do my bird banding. And I just remember my shoes were so unbearably tight and I couldn't figure out why. I just literally took off my shoes and my feet exploded. Like, they ballooned, like pink and purple. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't look good. But I'm trying to play it off because I also have this calculus test coming up. So I'm like, I need to pass this. I can't miss class. Yeah. So I'm literally limping across campus in 90-degree weather. And they're like, what's wrong? Oh, I'm fine. And then a friend of mine convinced me, she's like, you need to go to the infirmary. And so she helped me hobble over there. And the nurse was like, we need to take you to urgent care. And the whole ride, I'm like, what am I going to tell my mom? My mom is going to flip, which she did, because I needed to use her insurance for the medicine. So naturally, I had to tell her what was going on. And she's like, what? And so to this day, even still, when she comes down here, when she sees ants or just fire ants, she stomps on them. She's like, take that. She's like, take that.
Yeah. It's like, not to my baby kind of thing. Yeah. How dare you?
I'm like, the audacity.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's what it is. It's love.
Yeah, it's love.
That's the kind of experience that every toddler in Florida has. So you got the toddler experience when you went to college, because we learned that growing up, and it still happens. You'll get them your whole life.
Oh,
because as soon as you're paying attention to something else, they're like, okay, it's time to go.
They're literally waiting. They're like, here's our time.
I know it. I mean, they covered my feet. They covered them.
And anytime you're in the field with someone, you have to be like, whoa, fire ants. You know what I mean? Like, you're always warning other people where to stop.
Yes. And I hadn't experienced that. And man, did I get the wild ride of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Oof.
So let's bring that back to the stepping stone for the urban community, which is a lot of times community gardens. Not quite as scary. Still outdoors, still plants, not quite as scary, right?
Yeah.
I know you have some work with urban gardens. Are you working with any right now?
Not yet. At least I'm still exploring the South Florida growing community. So I'm connected with a lot of urban farmers. I support local farmers. I go to the farmer market every weekend. Shout out to Yellow Green Farmers Market. I love to support those local farmers because they need our support more than anything, especially during like the pandemic where they had such a high food waste rate. And it hurts my spirit because there's so much energy that goes into growing food and people don't realize that when they go into the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I try to bring that teaching into what I do with urban gardening, and even with like my students or just people in general. Like, you see it wrapped in plastic, but do you know how the energy it took to just grow the seed or just the watering aspect? Because it's more than just growing food. It's what the garden teaches you. It teaches you, dedication and patience and time and abundance. And that when you really work hard, you literally get the fruits of your labor. And so I love the garden because it teaches us so much about life in general. We all start from this dark space. And with the right nutrients and resources, we can bloom to our full potential to be just a help to others, to nurture them and provide abundance for them too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. I know that you often hear people will say, well, eating healthy is too expensive, especially when people are talking about becoming vegetarian or something like that. It's too expensive. Of course, what you said, there's a lot goes into making food. Mm-hmm. It's not instant. Well, if you're encouraging people to grow their own food or eat healthier, and a lot of people's thing is like, well, I can't because it's too expensive, Yeah.
I'm all about balling on a budget, You've
been in college,
Listen, period. Yeah. Balling on a budget is very real for people. And so I really try to emphasize the importance of finding the best book, the best deal for your book. And so sometimes I'm all about coupons. I love coupons. My goodness. Oh, yeah. But not just coupons, but like, where do comparison and contrast for some of the items that you have or that you want to have? You may not find it necessarily in the store for a cheaper price than that you would at the farmer's market. And sometimes it's vice versa. That's not to say the things at the farmer's market are cheaper. It might be quality, but it also, you're dealing with a different bracket. You're going straight to the middleman sometimes, or middlewoman sometimes, and be mindful of that. But it's definitely, especially with inflation right now, it's a challenging medium. It's a challenging medium to maneuver, and it's going to change. It's going to adjust accordingly depending on the people, depending on their circumstances. If they have a larger family, that also takes into account too. So it's hard to tell people how to be less, how to have this particular circumstance be less hardening on their pocket if I can't really know their circumstances, but I can give them the resources. That's the best thing. Like, where the best deals might be, or where you can get it for cheaper. Cause I love putting you on. Like, why you buy it over there when it's at Aldi's for $2.99? Or cause you just gotta beat the system.
Yeah.
Right.
You gotta beat the system because it's high out here. It is. It is. I can't lie. So it's just about, being a community and letting our community let us know, like, somewhere where I may not see, someone else may have. And they can tell me, oh, there's a deal going on at Target. There's a deal going on at all these. Get this now before it's too late, stuff like that. That's what I do.
That's like my whole life right there. You just described to everyone. So yeah, I get you. That's awesome.
Yeah. Or sometimes even at farmers markets, like, you might get something cheaper at this farmer's market as opposed to another one because that farmer is selling it a little bit less. It just really depends. And that's what variety comes in. So just expanding your wheelhouse of where you go.
Yeah.
It's also important.
I think what I'm hearing is like, don't just say it's too expensive and then that's your end. Explore and figure out where you can get things because there are deals out there to be had, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and as we're wrapping up, we have a seamless segue from food to Harry Potter. And
I live for Harry Potter references.
I mean, we've heard that you're diehard Potter. I don't know who told us. So weird.
I should have brought my wand and my cape, my house rose.
Yeah, right. I love that. So, what house are you? What house do you belong to?
Well, I'm Gryffindor all day.
Yeah,
it's been proven. Yes,
oh yeah,
I've taken the tests and all.
Oh, of course, yes. I knew you had. That wasn't a good. I was going to ask how deep does the obsession go, but I think we know actually. It's pretty deep. So what got you onto it? Why Harry Potter? Why do you love it?
Man, I used to read the books when I was a kid. I was a book nerd, the bookworm to the core. Yeah. I would rather read a book than go shopping with my mom. That was me. And it is still kind of me to some extent. But I just dove right into the series. Like I said, I love to read, and my mom kind of picked up on that. And it was all the craze when I was younger, when it was just coming out. And I just fell in love with it. Just book after book. I'd even go to just like the premiere showings that they would have. And
in your house, Rose? Were you dressed up as well?
In my house, Rose.
Yeah, I knew it.
It's more than just like the series or just like the franchise that they've created, right? It's what the book itself, the timeline or the storyline, what it represents. It represents sometimes real life. Like you have a good group of friends that you start off with, and you face a lot of these challenges together. You face a lot of, now, as I understand it, college, like being in school in general, I can tell you, like, when I got to college, I couldn't wait to call my teachers professors. I really couldn't. I'm sure they were sick of me. I would say, Professor Guido, how can such and such, I loved doing that. But it's just like the whole genre represents just life challenges and experiences that you go through, and how Harry in particular and all of his people or all of the characters that were in that series, all of them go through different experiences that are relatable. That was the main thing. It was very relatable to a lot of the stuff that was going on in the book that happens in real life. Whether you may have a big family like the Weasleys, or you may have a professor that you just despise, but actually really loves you. Professor Snape, R.I.P.
Yeah,
there will never be another. There will never be another. So that's what I took into reading the books. It was when I got older, that's what I realized. It was more than just the franchise itself. It was actually just what all of those characters represented. It represented a lot of people that I know, And so to this day, I'm a book nerd. Listen.
Have you moved on to Fantastic Beasts?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
It's like the adult version of Harry Potter, and I'm here for it.
There you go.
And no matter I always put myself in this mode that during the holidays, I have to watch a Harry Potter marathon. It's just my routine.
Oh, yeah.
But if it ever comes up on TV, I'm watching it. I'm definitely watching it. I'm stopping whatever I'm doing. Oh, Chamber of Secrets is on. Let's get comfortable.
It's not even the best one. It's just just A1.
And it's not even the best. Listen,
I love that. What else can we say? That was perfect. That was absolutely perfect.
Oh, that's great. You always have something that will bring you joy, and that's wonderful.
That's the most important thing. We're not here long enough to do the things that don't make us happy.
Yeah.
And I really emphasize that even as I get older, and in this day and age where the pandemic and we're losing a lot of loved ones, we're just not here long enough to not do the things that make us happy or bring us authentic joy. So I tell people how are you maintaining joy? Especially, I had to change my language during COVID. Like, how are people maintaining joy in this hard time? And so I still ask that now. How are you maintaining joy? And how is joy defined for you? Because that's different for everybody.
Right.
Harry Potter brings me joy. Wine brings me joy.
Oh, yeah.
Lasagna and mango season brings me joy.
Yeah.
This dinner TMDL Harry Potter date is just getting better and better.
Should I send you an invite?
Well, yeah. And speaking of, so we're getting close to the end of our time here. So what's on deck for you in the coming year?
Oh,
you have your list.
Yeah. And I'm hoping to just broaden the concept of what diversity in conservation can be and what it can look like. and exploring topics, perhaps a documentary of some kind, definitely focused around water, especially within this realm of water conservation and water justice, but bringing a more visual component to it that's more realistic. Not saying that it's not realistic already, but a different perspective of it. But especially being down here in Florida, whether you're living on the coast or like in Biscayne Bay, or even my other heart, which is the freshwater springs in Florida, which is what I absolutely love. Bringing that perspective into, especially freshwater, bringing that perspective to light in a different capacity is what I want to explore, hopefully within this upcoming year. So we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Anything else you want to mention before we jump off?
I'm just so grateful. I hope that people continue to cultivate joy and love and abundance in whatever capacity works for them. Continue to watch out for the Green Obsidian. It only goes up from here.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. We have really enjoyed talking to you, and tell people where they can get in touch with you.
Yes, you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn with my URL Sierra T, or you can connect with me on Facebook either through my regular handle or the Green Obsidian as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
That's our show. Thank you, Sierra, for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. We also want to thank our sponsor, Integrity Environmental. Check them out at www.integrity-env.com. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
Yeah, everybody.